Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Myth of Logos, the Gatekeeper of Serrano House. Old Vern had kept the gate at Serrano House for 40 years, and in all that time he had never once been seen to rest. The house had two great rooms, joined by a single door no wider than a hand, and Vern's post was that door. Through it passed the restless sprites of breath and heat, the servants said, though no one could see them, only feel the rooms grow warm or cool, depending on where they gathered. Long ago, both rooms had been the same temperature, and even in different warmth throughout. But the sprites did not move evenly. Some rushed, some dawdled, and it was said that a gatekeeper with a quick enough eye could sort them, led the rushing ones through the eastern room, turned the dawdling ones back west, until one room burned bright and the other went cold, and a great engine could be built between them to do useful work, powered by nothing but the sorting itself. This was the task Varin had inherited, and the task he now meant to pass on. His apprentice was a boy named Osei, sharp-eyed and hungrier for understanding than any apprentice Varin had trained. On his first night at the gate, Osei watched the old man work. A flick of the wrist, a whispered word, a sprite sent east, another sent west. And after an hour he said what every apprentice eventually said. You're not doing any work at all. You're only choosing. The door swings on its own weight. You spend no effort forcing anything through. You just decide and let it go where it was already going. Varin smiled, the way he always did at this observation, because it was the observation that had once fooled him too. Then tell me, he said, why the house has not yet split itself into fire and frost, with no gatekeeper at all. If sorting costs nothing, why does it not happen by accident, everywhere, always? Why does spilled wine never unmix itself back into the bottle? Why does a shattered cup never leap back together from the floor? Osei had no answer. He only knew, as everyone knew, that some things ran one direction and refused to run the other, that this was simply the nature of things. That disorder was patient and increased when left alone, and order was rare and had to be paid for. So if I am truly sorting the sprites for free, Varin said, then you and I have found a hole in the nature of things, a place where the world's oldest debt goes unpaid. Sit with me a season, and either you will find the hole, or you will find the price I'm paying that I haven't shown you. Osei sat with him a season. At first, he watched only the door. Then he began watching Varin's hands, and noticed that before each sprite passed, the old man's fingers moved briefly against the length of knotted cord at his belt, tying some small knot, feeling for a shape. What is that? Osei asked. How I know which way to send them, Varin said. I can't sort what I haven't first told apart. Fast from slow. I have to ask each one which it is, and hold the answer somewhere, if only for a breath before I act on it. The cord, the cord. Osei examined it. The cord was long, but it was not endless. And here, finally, was something he had not considered. Sometime near dawn, always, Varin would take the cord entirely into both hands and pull it straight, unmaking every knot at once, and only then begin again for the new day. Why undo it? Osei asked. Why not simply keep tying new knots, new cord forever? Because I own only the one cord, Varin said, as in the end does everyone. There is no infinite length of it anywhere in this house or in any house. So each knot I tie must eventually be untied to make room for the next. That is the part you haven't watched yet. Watch it tonight. Osei watched. The sorting, all night, cost the old man nothing that he could see. Light fingers, a whispered word, no strain at all. But at dawn, when Varian seized the cord in both hands, pulled it straight, unmaking a night's worth of knots in one motion, the boy felt it before he understood it. A wash of warmth off the cord, faint but real, spreading into the room like breath on a cold window. The undoing was not free. The doing had been free. The forgetting was where the bill came due. There, Varian said, watching the boy's face change. You felt it. That is the whole of the trick, and the whole of why it isn't a trick at all. I never once cheated at that. I only found where the ledger keeps its true entry, not in the choosing, but in the clearing of the memory that made the choosing possible. Sort as many sprites as you like for free, but you cannot sort forever without a memory of your sorting, and you cannot hold a memory forever. And the moment you let it go, you pay, with interest, everything you thought you'd saved. Osei was, of course, apprentice, not to a keeper of sprites, but to a keeper of an idea that had haunted physicists for over a century, Maxwell's demon, and the debt it seemed to escape, and the reason it never actually could. The concept, Maxwell's demon and why information has a thermodynamic price. The setup. In 1867, James Clerk Maxwell proposed the thought experiment to probe the second law of thermodynamics. The law, stating that the entropy, roughly the disorder or the number of equally likely microscopic arrangements of an isolated system, never decreases over time. Maxwell imagined a box of gas at uniform temperature, divided into two chambers by a partition with a tiny frictionless trapdoor. A demon sits at the door and watches individual molecules approach. Gas molecules at a given temperature don't all move at the same speed. Their speeds follow a distribution, the Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution, with some moving fast and some slow. The demon opens the door to let fast molecules pass only from left to right and slow molecules pass only from right to left, while blocking the reverse. Over time, the right chamber heats up and the left chamber cools down, with no energy apparently expended by the demon, since the door is frictionless and the demon only decides, never forces. This appears to spontaneously decrease the entropy of the system, converting a uniform disordered gas into a hot chamber and a cold chamber, a more ordered state, without doing work. That would violate the second law. Why this troubled physics for a century? The puzzle isn't really about literal demons. It's about whether information itself, the demon's knowledge of each molecule's speed, is thermodynamically free. If sorting information costs nothing, the second law has an exploitable loophole, and with it, the possibility of extracting unlimited useful work from a uniform temperature system. A temperature gradient can drive an engine. This is precisely what a Szilard engine, a single molecule idealization of the same idea, was designed to demonstrate in 1929. The resolution, Landauer's principle. The answer, developed by Leo Szilard and given its modern rigorous form by Ralph Landauer in 1961 and later completed by Charles Bennett in the 1980s, is this: the act of measuring a molecule's speed and deciding which way to send it can, in principle, be done with arbitrarily little energy cost. The demon's choosing, like Varian's knot tying, really can be thermodynamically cheap. The unavoidable cost arises elsewhere. The demon must remember each decision, at least momentarily, and that memory is stored in some physical medium with finite capacity. Since the demon operates indefinitely but has only finite memory, it must eventually erase old records to make room for new ones. Landauer's principle states that erasing one bit of information in a physical system at temperature T necessarily dissipates at least E larger or equal to K underscore B times T times ln 2 as heat into the environment, where Kb is Boltzmann's constant. This is not an engineering limitation. It is a fundamental consequence of the second law itself. Erasure is a logically irreversible operation. It maps two possible prior states, bit equals 0, bit equals 1, into a single state, the erased default. Because physical dynamics at a microscopic level are reversible, any process that is logically irreversible must compensate by exporting entropy into the environment as heat. You cannot destroy information for free, because information is encoded in physical degrees of freedom, and collapsing those degrees of freedom into a known default state necessarily increases the entropy of everything else. When Bennett accounted for the demon's memory in full, including the eventual necessity of resetting it to sort the next batches of molecules, the entropy saved by the demon's clever sorting is exactly cancelled, on average, by the entropy dissipated when its memory is erased. The second law survives untouched. The demon never got something for nothing. It merely deferred the payment to the one step everyone had forgotten to watch, not the sorting, but the forgetting. Landauer's principle is now a working constraint in real physics and in engineering. It sets an absolute lower bound on the energy cost of computation, since every computer at some point erases bits, overwrites memory, resets registers. Modern computers dissipate roughly a billion times more energy per erased bit than the Landauer limit. But as cheap designers approach fundamental limits of energy efficiency, this bound, long treated as a philosopher's curiosity, has become an active constraint in the design of reversible and low-power computing architectures. The deeper lesson that von Waring was really teaching Jose is that information is not an abstraction sitting outside physics, exempt from its laws. Information is always encoded in some physical substrate, and manipulating that substrate, especially on making a record of it, is subject to the same thermodynamic accounting as everything else in the universe. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Myth of Logos. See you next time.